Hello, everyone. Today, I had the distinct privilege of being able to sit down with a young man who attends our church here in Dothan, Alabama. And the reason why Heath agreed to sit down and talk with me is because, well, we always have these kind of conversations at church, but he also agreed with me that more conversations like this are necessary. Dialogue between clergy and student, between older generations and younger generation. There's a lot of young people that are on our college campuses today that in many cases sometimes feel as though they're being encouraged to be curious, they're being encouraged to investigate, to question, to test boundaries, but then they look to older generations who aren't willing conversation partners. And so we really wanted to change that. We really wanted to challenge that paradigm and instead model what it looks like for a priest talks to a college student, older generation to younger generation, dialogue across these types of walks of life. And we had a great conversation. We had a fun time. We covered a lot of different topics that you'll find that we covered everything from theology, society, even some of the conspiracy theories that are thrown around nowadays. But I hope you'll enjoy our conversation and just consider it as possibly a model for how generations talk to each other. And this is how you pass on ideas about how people keep the faith going and build the kingdom of God actually over time. Anyway, join us on this journey. Okay, here we go.
Okay. So we're here.
All right. So I appreciate you coming in and being able to have this conversation. You say you're kind of nervous for the conversation. No, definitely not more than me.
You're nervous of what's going to come out of my mouth.
because it's whatever comes out of your mouth is fine. You're attending where?
Troy University.
Troy University, and that's up in Troy, or
yes, sir, up in Troy.
Okay. But so whatever you say is fine. I don't edit my guests. I mean, I don't censor them or anything like that. It's me that is like, okay, I'm sitting here on a caller. I got to watch my P's and Q's.
Yes,
and
sir.
So, well, the reality is, I mean, when I've been prior to here, I've been a chaplain for fire departments for 17 years. For a long time, my first department was in East Texas. And then eventually over time, I got more and more accustomed to ministering to and interacting with firefighters. So I go and just hang out with them at the station. Well, eventually I go back to my church, and oftentimes I was a deacon serving under a priest. And whoever the priest was, he's like, yeah, you spend a lot of time with your firefighters. I said, yeah, I know. Isn't it great? He goes, yeah, we can tell. I'm like, oh, oops.
Well, and that's something that I think is great about our church is it's a very personal relationship between the priest and the people. Because, we can sit on the back porch after church and talk and, just, shoot the crap about
exactly
anything.
Well, that's why I really like that we have that third service.
Yes, sir.
It's the idea of just being able to sit and hang out, and that informal time is when a lot of those great exchanges happen. But our men's night, specifically last Friday of the month, if you're ever able to make it for one of those.
I'll plan on making it this month.
Oh, fantastic.
So I'm blocking out some time for that.
Oh, wonderful. Because that's really where the conversations, you have no idea where they're going to go.
Well, and especially as a younger man myself, I'm only 21, being around some older gentlemen that have been there, done that, and can tell me some things that, may not even be religious, church advice, but just in general life advice is something that I value a lot, and I find very beneficial to my life. Being able to get that, different perspective from somebody that's, has a lot more experience in, life or anything.
Well, I came from a church tradition where all those things had to be a program: mentoring, community gathering. These all had to be a program of some type, and so. Someone would propose a program, and they'd say, well, we need to have a special initiative for XYZ. And I'm fine now in where I'm at now, it's in the Anglican Communion. That's actually very organic. Well, you don't need a special program. It just happens naturally.
And don't get me wrong, I think Celebrate Recovery, and that's an example that I'm about to use, is I think it's great. I think that's great for, people that, need that.
Mm-hmm.
But, let's say I'm dealing with an issue. What am I going to feel more comfortable doing? Coming to you and saying, Father, I'm dealing with this issue, or, going into a program that's much more, rigid and regimented. It's not going to be as organic. And a lot of times, in my experience, it doesn't seem genuine.
Right.
It doesn't seem genuinely that you want to help. It's this is what the program is about. This is what my job is.
Right.
And that's something that I think the organic interactions that we have here is very, beneficial for. If I'm having an issue with something, I can come to you or John or Wayne or somebody and say, hey, look, I'm having this issue.
Right.
And genuinely out of the kindness of your heart is how I feel that I'm being helped. Not out of, okay, well, the program, this book, this guide, whatever.
Right. Let me go through my pamphlet and go through the exact steps.
Well, and I think it's a very individual thing with different people. A book or a program is not going to tell you how to deal with each specific problem.
Right.
And in some cases, it could do more harm than good.
Well, especially if that person who is on both sides of that, right? But especially the person who's wanting help. They're like, kind of another exploding sun painted on the side of your Corsair. I mean, am I just, that came out of a lot of the evangelism movements, right? A lot of evangelism movements was all about going through the four spiritual laws and basically going through, James Kennedy's evangelism explosion, or ways of sharing the gospel in a manner that was very mechanical. Really just, he was looking more for a notch on your bedpost, and rather than just having conversations and letting it kind of unfold organically.
Well, and the thing about, sharing the gospel, I think, the evangelism movement, I could be wrong in this, but something that was briefly mentioned in one of my classes, the interwar years of World War II, and the class before that was the time period before that, the industrial age in America. It comes out of a lot of the, organic, not organic, the sharing the gospel, being a program, being regimented,
right,
comes out of a lot of these movements, in my opinion, of you getting into heaven is based on how many people you convert. And that's not the case. And
right.
I'm one of the few believers in my circles here in Troy. And in my opinion, sharing the gospel, it could be something as simple as, hey, dude, I know you don't believe in God, but he still loves you.
Right.
That's something on my way down here, talked to one of my non-believing friends on the phone. And he was talking about, sometimes things not working out as protection. I said, well, dude, even though you don't believe in God, he's still protecting you. He's still working with you. And that just organic way of sharing the gospel, of sharing, certain tidbits, I think is in some ways more helpful than the, hey, have you ever heard of Jesus? Let me pray for you. And, the street preacher kind of thing.
Oh, gosh. There was, it really rubs people the wrong way sometimes, the way I analyze the street preachers.
Oh, yeah.
My analysis of the sandwich sign street preachers that I would see on college campuses doesn't sit well with some, because I would watch them from a perspective of an anthropologist. Like, as an evangelist, as someone who's a minister, I would look at them and go, I'm not sure why you maintain that tactic, because basically the number of converts, people that convert that by that method, remains steadily somewhere around zero.
Oh, absolutely.
So obviously conversion is not the goal. Making a convert is not the goal of that person. So what is the goal? So what I started doing is I started thinking about, okay, how are you going to develop credibility in a bounded social network? And how are you what's your method of status acquisition? Particularly, and this again gets really rather crass, but again, I'm thinking try to take off some of the ministerial blinders and go, what you got is a bounded sexual marketplace. Where you've got a very small group of people that are all wanting to date each other. And as a result, the status acquisition, or the ways in which the buck grows the bigger antlers and the does notice them, that has to have some means of manifesting within what is an acceptable means of social status, of acquiring social status. If you notice that all those street preachers on college campi, almost all of them, most of the time, fall within a certain age bracket, because they haven't aged out of the sexual marketplace, where they are either consciously or unconsciously making themselves more attractive to other women within that system.
Well, I heard a figure actually last night, listening to the Joe Rogan podcast. Now, can't verify this. I don't know, the validity of it, but something that was thrown out was only 20% of males are viable in these dating marketplace.
Yeah.
The other 80% don't have any kind of chance. And so when you talk about this chasing status,
Right.
I think that's something in our society we do have a issue with, not just with the street preachers, not just with, a frat guy wanting to, have all the women, have all the parties, whatever. Chasing status, I think, is something that's just innate to.
Right, exactly. But sometimes we tend to fool ourselves in thinking that we're exempt because if we give it religious terms.
Absolutely.
If we give it spiritual enough terms, somehow it's exempt from the normal human foibles and flaws and hiccups that we all operate with. I mean, no, it's always the case. My wife and I were watching a television show that I really couldn't justify, but it was really an opportunity to turn your mind off. Big Brother.
Okay.
You're familiar with it.
I've heard of it.
And I'm watching this and I'm going, oh my gosh, the way in which these people just connive and scheme and are just lying to one another, and who can build what alliance, and who's going to be in good with another person, and what's the way in which they can gain advantage in a manner that no one else saw coming. And I thought, so my first reaction was, oh my gosh, this is the dumbest thing I've seen in a long time. It's that quote from Billy Madison. Everyone here is now dumber for having heard it.
Yes, sir.
I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul. But then as I noticed a little bit more, I started actually I turned my mind back on for a second and realized this is a cross-section of humanity right here. And you do observe this in a lot of different contexts. The church isn't immune to it. And certainly no group of people is immune to this. And so many of us may be uncomfortable with a show like that because it's brazenly putting out there on camera what the rest of us feel like we're too sophisticated to expose.
Well, something that, even in my college classes, I've noticed, just in the years I've been there, anytime, and especially I noticed with men specifically, but women too, when you walk into a room and when you walk into an environment, a group of people, you do see this kind of pecking order, this hierarchy take place. And it's not something that anybody's consciously thinking about.
Right.
It's something that just kind of organically develops.
Right.
These reality shows, my cousin was here in Dothan for the summer, and she exposed me to some reality shows that probably a Christian shouldn't be watching, but it was like a train wreck,
Right.
It was terrible, but you didn't want to look away.
Right.
But it was all these, dating shows or, namely The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives.
Oh, goodness.
Please don't waste your time with it. But
right. Yeah.
But you see the way that these people in these, controlled environments, it's, in a way, survival of the fittest. I mean, they eat each other apart. And I think that, you with an anthropology background, when you see things like that, you see how humans just are ravenous in a really a tribal sense.
My background is kind of weird because I have both my masters are in theology and in anthropology.
Yes, sir.
And so, what's interestingly enough, anthropology is actually a Christian
Okay.
So anthropology as a doctrine is the church's pursuit of understanding about the nature of man as described within the Bible and through observational understanding as well. But what does the scriptures have to say about the nature of mankind? And so that's actually, so you'll study your major doctrines within seminary. You'll go through theology. In theology, you'll discuss the Bible, the Trinity. You'll look at end times. You'll look at the doctrine of the church, the doctrine of salvation, all these various different doctrines. And among those doctrines is what all the Bible and the church fathers and everyone historically has said about what is the nature of mankind, what their status before God. How much has the fall of mankind affected us? Has it affected all of us? All of us as a whole has affected all of us as an individual, our being. And so what is the nature of it? Has sin so weakened or marred or broken the human condition that how totally dependent are we upon God's grace for that? So that's anthropology as a doctrine. But interestingly enough, entirely separate from formal theology is anthropology as a soft science pursuit.
Yes, sir.
In way in which you study patterned shared human behavior. And so going back through, as far back as you can study humans in the past. So interestingly enough, when I look at shared patterned human behavior, going back as far back as we can study, what I see is that what we find from the theology of anthropology, the doctrine of anthropology, is that The fall of man has equally affected the sexes. Neither male nor female is less affected by the fall of mankind. In that, both of us have the same capacity for sin. We have the same capacity. Now, all that depravity will manifest in ways that can be sex specific.
Absolutely.
You have all sins are equally sinful, but not all sins are equally probable. So you may have anger as a vice, rage, wrath as the deadly sins that will manifest more probably. They have a higher probability of manifesting in physical violence for men and a higher probability of manifesting in social destruction for women.
Yes, sir.
But it's the same sin that is equally distributed across the sexes. And so you study behaviors and you're like, oh my goodness, no matter what culture, anywhere you go, this theology always remains true. That's something interesting.
Back to one of our early conversations when I first started coming here, how anthropology, we were talking about, why is heaven up and hell's seen as down?
Right.
Anthropology justifies Christianity in a way. The more and more you've talked to me about it and all that, you see how humans are built for a relationship with God. And when you talk about sin, I personally believe, sin corrupts everything. Sin is not just, I do something to you and that makes God mad at me, right? Do something God doesn't like and God doesn't want anything to do with it. Sin corrupts everything to an atomic level. When fire is talked about in the Bible, a lot of times fire is talked about as a cleansing kind of thing, not as a destructive force that we know today and use the fire chaplain know all too well. Sin. So without God, I'm of the opinion. You talk about anthropology. Was it Hobbes or Locke? The noble savage.
Yeah, I think it's Locke. Yeah,
Locke. He talks about the noble savage. Well, archaeology says that's not the case at all. But humans, I think, in and of themselves, come out of the womb wicked. If you look at the way kids play on a playground, nobody had to teach them to steal toys from each other. They do that.
There are two people that you do not have to really argue much to convince them of the doctrine of human depravity, and that is police officers and daycare workers.
Oh, absolutely.
Because no one taught little Johnny to yank Susie's hair. He just did it, and he didn't care whether she cried about it.
Well, and that's something that I think in our society, a civilian like myself from the outside may look at a police force and say, what are we doing here? What is this all about?
Right.
What you're locking up people for war on drugs, whatever.
Right.
But then you talk to some of these police officers. I've had the opportunity and the privilege to know a officer with the Mobile SWAT department, a close family friend.
Oh wow!
And you hear the total just craziness, the depravity that people have the capability from. Yeah. And some of that, in my opinion, I think some of it comes from evil. Also, some of it comes from stupidity.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
But it's amazing what can happen in studying history. That's what I get my degree in. You see just how evil and wicked people can be. It's amazing.
The problem of evil is one of the big reasons why. I mean, because for me, I've had different times in life when faith was kind of tested. When I hit some academic level or some, have some. Usually, mostly it hasn't been my personal experience. It has been something that I've just read or something that I've studied that makes me look back at my faith and go, am I still holding to this as much as I used to? And the reason why I keep coming back is that the problem of evil is grossly inadequately described and addressed from any other system of thought known to man, other than what the scriptures look at the problem of evil, and then seeing it as the world, the flesh, and the devil is how it gets summarized. Well, the world, the flesh is just our own inherent ability for evil. We just seem to generate that by ourselves. We're not sinners because we sin. We sin because we're sinners. But then there's what they call the world, which is collective depravity. The fact that we're able to just do stuff as a whole that we might not do ourselves. One of the books I read last year was called The Nazi Conscience, and the author's name was Kuntz, I think it was. But the Nazi conscience is that when you had enough collective people all together, they had truly convinced themselves that turning in your neighbors and doing these things was actually a social good. And so it's not this sense of, okay, these people, the government did something and everyone else just didn't know about it. No, down to at the cultural level, everyone had informed their conscience where they were able to all think to themselves they're doing the right thing as many of their neighbors were carted off. Well, but then we have to get around. We're never going to be able to get around the fact that there actually is a devil. There actually is sentient malevolence also at play as well.
Well, and when it gets to the idea of social evil as what you're talking about, these people, if you have nobody out there saying, "Oh, this is bad, this is good," if you lose the Bible entirely and you say, what I'm doing is turning my neighbors, turning X, Y, Z, you can justify to yourself, because if nobody's standing up and saying this is wrong, this is what we shouldn't be doing, and everybody around you believes, quote unquote, believes that that's what they're doing is right, there's nothing stopping you from really stopping and saying, is this right or wrong? If you have a child that has never been taught right from wrong, they're not going to think outside of that.
Well, that's why we do have the mystery of the conscience. It's really difficult to totally nail down what that is, because it appears to be something specific to the human condition that is influenceable by the divine apart from social pressures. It is also very much influenceable by the social pressures. That's why conscience is a muscle that can atrophy, right? People can lose their conscience. But somehow the conscience is something that we haven't been able to quite nail down, because it is subject to use or misuse or atrophy if you don't listen to your conscience. It is subject to some social pressures, because you can do things that your conscience is completely seared. The scripture, the idea with the seared conscience, where it seems to go away. But it also, mysteriously, mystically, inexplicably, is somehow subject to divine influence, where a person spontaneously can be touched by the Holy Spirit to go, this doesn't feel right to me. But, and now throw into that mix, that even further, how we can't explain why it is that we sometimes find cultures that we would declare completely pagan that seemingly have a well-developed sense of morality.
Well, such as the Greeks.
Aztecs.
Well, I'm not too familiar with the Aztecs. You're much more familiar with them.
Right.
But these are the same people that did human sacrifices, if I'm not wrong. How does... Please expand on that.
Well, no. They actually had a well-developed sense of morality. They had concerns about public drunkenness. They had laws about infidelity. They had understandings of covenantal relationships that shouldn't be violated. They understood some ideas of property: do not steal your neighbor's things. A lot of what we see in the Ten Commandments also would be echoed in that society. It's just that for them, they just happen to have a worldview whereby you guys have to constantly be sacrificing people, ripping their hearts out up to the sun to keep it going, because it could stop. I mean, if you stop sacrificing people, that was part of a maladaptive social trait for them, because by constantly having to sacrifice people in order to keep the sun going, they had to have constant war captives. And by constantly having to have war captives, they had to stay constantly at war with their neighbors, which means that everyone around you hates you, which means that when Hernan Cortez shows up, he's able to conquer you, even though you outnumber him about 1,000 to 1, but all of your neighbors are going to side with him, not you. But nevertheless, you would say, well, how can that be the thing with their human sacrifice? Well, remember, human sacrifice is pretty ubiquitous across cultures and time too.
Absolutely.
So it's not really that much of an outlier that humans who have human sacrifice also have a kind of a sense of morality that they develop over time, seemingly a conscience, but this is also why the Apostle Paul addresses it in Romans.
From my understanding, I don't know exactly what the official Anglican doctrine is, but I think that it's something that, Genesis, when God talks about breathing life into Adam, a lot of people, a lot of theologians have taken that as less literal as God created, he did create us, don't get me wrong. But, the breathing life into Adam, Adam, as the Hebrew translation is more talking about consciousness. Having a sense of consciousness. Before this, we were brutish, you could even say less evolved.
Right.
How would you say that the Aztecs or the Norse pagans or whoever did this human sacrifice, they have this sense of morality, but how would you say that did it not go all the way? Did they not? They had no knowledge of Jesus Christ until the Spanish got there.
Right.
Norse had no knowledge of Jesus Christ until they encountered that in England.
Right.
But was some part of consciousness left out? Some part of morality left out, or was it justification? How would you say that happened?
Well, so what we learn about their sacrifices is pretty brutal, right? And it's pretty nasty, and we see this from archaeological finds from codices. There are some in Mexico today who will say, "Well, that's all Spanish propaganda." No, come on. The archaeology, all the accoutrements, all the architecture, all their codices that were written about that time and is painted on their walls is that these are the sacrifices. These are the manner in which they were flaying people, cutting out their hearts. Sometimes ritual cannibalism. You sacrifice children to the rain god Tlaloc, because when you do and the children are crying, that's actually a good omen, because the more tears that the child cries on their way to be sacrificed indicates you'll have more abundant rains for that year's harvest. I mean, these are all things we in the West, we just are completely mortified to think about. But you have to think about it, though. How much more pagan are they than everything we see in the ancient Near East?
Oh, absolutely not.
Not at all. And in terms of forms of torturous death, which is, if we describe crucifixion to them, they're going to go, "You people are gross." And so the point is that, and people oftentimes say, "Well, we're not like them. We don't believe in human sacrifice." Well, of course we do. Just one of them.
And you're talking about Jesus Christ.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we would say that Christ is a human sacrifice, is so potent that no more are needed.
So, and I think that will be good for the conversation in laying that out and saying, we're not like these people.
Right.
No, we really are. And it opens up the dialogue in saying that, nothing about my culture makes me inherently better.
Right.
Now, what I will say is that this argument, I'd like to hear your opinion on the argument that there is no morality outside of Christ. Because without God, I can only speak for myself here, but without God, there's nothing stopping me from being a terrible human being, aside from laws. But how would what would be your response to saying that there's no morality outside of God?
So you're raising a really good question. This is something that ethicists have dealt with in terms of kind of two major schools of thought. There may be nuances between them, but two major schools of thought are going to be natural law or presuppositionalism.
Okay.
Presuppositionalism is you presuppose morality must be sourced in the divine, must be sourced in revelation from God. That's where morality is going to get to that. And then because naturally a person who doesn't have God as their ultimate arbiter, and because you think about morality as being a law of God, well, if you don't think there's a God, who's spoken any law? If you don't think there's a God, who's spoken any law? So the person logically who's an atheist can't answer why something is right or wrong beyond some sort of social contract idea. And the presuppositionalist will use as their argumentation the ways in which an atheist logically could argue their way out of any moral position. You have from the atheist perspective, you don't have any real firm logical reason not to commit certain sins other than fear of consequence, right? So the presuppositionalist takes that position, but then the person who goes the natural law discipline says, yeah, but then you have a difficult time explaining the phenomena of so many different moral systems throughout the world for which Christ is not, has the gospel hasn't gone there, and they're not overtly ascribing it to that Christian heritage. And so why do you have certain moral codes within just about every society throughout the world that has this idea and even Paul suggests this early on in Romans, that there are moral people who themselves condemn themselves because they have a law in their hearts that they haven't even lived up to. So for me, the jury's a little out. I mean, I do lean toward one than the other, but I highly respect on both sides. I tend to lean more toward the presuppositionalist side because I look at our own society and think, well, collectively, once we stopped attributing our morality to God says so, we were very creative and very elaborate in our schemes of getting out from underneath those moral codes. Once we got away from God says so. And so I tend to be more on the presuppositionalist side. But there are also people who argue natural law that, quite frankly, they could argue circles around me. I would, one author has written a book called What We Can't Not Know. The author is Jay Budasevsky. And he's very much, I think he's a professor of philosophy at University of Texas in Austin. Anyway, Jay Budasevsky made the argument that there are certain things that are inherent within the human condition that you can't not know these things. You can claim you do, but you don't. In any attempt to say, well, these are right and wrong because of the social contract, because of just conscience, all these things, they fall short because society hasn't adapted sufficiently to explain why it is that people hold to a morality that is beyond mere fear of consequences. Society, because the consequences that a society and a government and a law code might enact can't account for all the good things people do. They just can't account for it. And so you don't have evolutionary explanations for every reason why a person will commit an act of benevolence, every reason why a person may do something beyond what is arguable for their own self-interest. You don't have evolutionary explanations for that any more than you have good evolutionary explanations for all the evil we're capable of either.
Well, and I think that a lot of the, you talk about the atheist, argument, and I have dear friends who are atheists. Mm-hmm. And I would say they're very moral people. Right. I love them to death. Mm-hmm. They would do anything in the world for me. But something that I've talked to them about is, who makes you, a mere human, this arbitrator of morality? Humble yourself. I'm not... Right. Part of the reason I came to Christianity is I realized, and this is a cop-out trope answer, but I'm a mere human. I need something outside of myself. I need a savior. But, if I believe, okay, well, murder's bad, but if I kill this person for this... dictators are a perfect example. Yeah, murder's bad, don't do it, but if we kill this enemy of the state or this enemy of whatever, then it's justified. Right. And then next thing you know, you've committed genocide. Right. I think the problem with atheism in and of itself is I'm not saying this in a generalized term, but a lot of atheists seem to be very prideful of themselves and prideful of their own understanding. And the Bible talks about even, lean not on your own understanding. Right. That's not a good argument to them because obviously I don't believe in it. Right. But who gave you the right to say what's moral and say what's not?
The illusion of autonomy has really been seductive. And I'd say, for us, it really starts with better historians than me would be able to describe this. But it seems that a lot of that, well, first of all, it's a human condition that's always been true. But in mass, it really seemed to have taken off after the Enlightenment, where we became absolutely enamored with all that we're able to discover. And great novel. I cannot recommend it enough for its theological value. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Okay. Yes, sir.
It's awesome. Oh my gosh. Because she crafts a story and to summarize the plot point, you can summarize it well with Jeff Goldblum's quote from Jurassic Park. your scientists were so enamored with whether or not they could, they never stopped to wonder whether or not they should.
Absolutely.
And Victor Frankenstein absolutely is enamored with this post-Enlightenment ability to discover, and he's on the he's on the cusp of discovery, and he's just going to push through, and he's going to go beyond what is considered natural and what was in life.
He tries to become a god.
Exactly right. Well, at a certain point, it's awesome because at a certain point he has this conversation with the creature, and the creature is looking him square in the eye and say, did it never occur to you that the thing created would turn to its creator and say, for what purpose did you make me? Did you give no thought to where your actions would go? You sought the actions of God without ever considering the responsibilities of God.
That's something right there.
Right.
Well, I think that story with the whole advent of AI right now.
Right.
I think we need to restudy that.
Oh, gosh. Certain things should be required viewing to Elon Musk and everybody else. I'm like,
oh, absolutely.
Well, no, and because when we talk about evil, and that seems like it's beyond what would be, evolutionary explainable. I mean, let's hit a hot topic if we could. The whole Jeffrey Epstein stuff.
What Epstein stuff? What list?
I know, right? I have no idea what you're talking about. They pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Okay, so one person dead because of this pedophile ring, one person in jail trying to cut a deal for this pedophile ring, and supposedly this international, widespread, non-pedophile ring that is completely has no files related to it at all. And yet what we have is no arrests, no arrested pedophiles, just people that organized this ring for a lot of clients and a lot of people that were trafficked, but we have no arrests for people who whoever were clients of the ones that were trafficked. It's like, this is a very interesting thing to me, how it is that it kind of adds to the way in which our trust in institutions is eroding in many ways. But when you talk about the sins of that, talk about the ways in which these powerful people, why is it that they seemingly, the more powerful they get, the more constraints are taken off, the more deviant, the more just a word, more evil, but the more grotesque those desires get, to the point where the rest of us go, I can't explain that at all. Well, there's no evolutionary explanation. There's no practical explanation. There's something metaphysically evil about this.
Well, two things I have to say about that. Number one, a lot of the people that are saying that that the Epstein list can't be released, the Epstein whole thing is because society would crumble, the institutions would fall. Well, I'm sorry, but if your institutions will fall because a bunch of pedophiles get exposed, they don't need to exist in the first place. And that's something a lot of people aren't ready to hear, because I don't want to be supporting that, and we'll deal with the aftermath after that, but I don't want to support that evil. Number two, I mean, and this is touched on another hot button issue, Diddy. They get to this level of power to where it just doesn't. Sin is something that, in my opinion, if you commit one sin, right? Let's say you start off a little bit with lying, right? Mm-hmm. Well, you tell one lie, you're going to get that little burst of dopamine. Right. You get that, or gambling, right? Not saying that gambling, in and of itself is wrong.
Right.
But let's say you start out just a little bit, and then you get that hit of dopamine. Mm-hmm. And then you get more and more and more. Same thing with these sexual perverts.
Right.
Human nature. People like sex.
It's a bigger and bigger high.
And that's what it is, okay, well, maybe I can do this with my wife, and I got off on that. Now let me try this with a 18-year-old.
Okay.
And then they keep going down, down, down. But the problem with that is, it's like we talked about with the book about the Nazis.
Right.
Did nobody at any of these Epstein parties or Diddy parties, whatever, look around and go, what am I doing here?
Well, there's that, but if you have that level of power, this is why I also feel that there's the whole scenario, government cover-ups notwithstanding, the whole examination of what the sins that take place in all these things, and how it demonstrates where powerful people kind of wind up. The more powerful someone becomes, such that they are above any sort of scrutiny, the greater to what you're saying, it seems like the greater the deviation from the norm is necessary to achieve the same high. And and with the comfort that they're insulated from consequence. And and that's in a way in which the conscience gets really elastic, right? There's no one around you that's going to say, this is wrong, because who's ever on that island, they're only people on that island are people that are going to approve of what they're doing, because they can assume that no one else around them is going to call them out. No one else around them is going to shame them for what they're doing. There is no one in that social network that's going to say, no, guys, this is wrong. No one's going to be what I call, my term, the social sentinel. A sentinel is one that stands guard, keeps watch, right? The social sentinel is, to me, within a social bounded a bounded social network, is the one who keeps watch and tends to kind of be something of an enforcer, even if they don't have the physical ability. They can enforce through a gaze. They enforce through their watchful eye. They can enforce just through a disapproving stare. The social sentinel is the one in front of whom others don't really misbehave. Quick story. So in all my time in archaeology, I would hear stories about what happens in the field. What happens in the field stays in the field. And they would tell me about someone in an archaeological dig in Mexico or in Belize or whatever. And people would come back to the university and say, boy, that person, they're one way back in the States, but when they get out they become a real hound dog out in the field, because they're unmoored from the rest of their normal life, and they just, they start drinking a little bit, and that person, like all the ladies, and the social sciences are largely populated with women, and so typically you'll have like one guy who's running the dig, and all these other women that are on the dig with them, and they'll all talk about how they were, some sort of sexual harassment occurred while they were there, some unwanted come on or something like that. And they're like, he doesn't behave that way back on campus, but out here. And I would hear that. But then I had to compare that to all my time I spent in the field and never saw anything like that. So the time I spent in the field in Mexico, Peru, and throughout Florida, I never saw any misbehaviors, even though I was among other people who people would say, that person seems like a party person. That person seems like they really like to, have a good time. But I never saw that. Now, there's a couple of ways you can, a couple of conclusions you can draw from that. You can draw the conclusion that I'm blind as a bat, and it's happening right in front of me, and I don't see it. And of course, some feminist professor would say, because you're a male and you don't see these things. But that's one explanation you can give. The other explanation I would give is that somehow some men have it within them to be the social sentinel, and others don't misbehave in front of them. Well, because that person knows that I'm going to say, hey, jerk.
Well, and that's something, I was talking about. You walk into these class settings, or these group settings. There are certain men, whether it be the professor, classmates, whatever, that you don't, it's not that you respect them or that you fear them, but it's you don't. Like, a lot of the men that go to church here, I would say that 99% of them here, if they see you doing something unsavory, now they may not react with overt violence. Now some of them will.
Right.
We're not mentioning any names here.
Right.
But there is going to be a reaction from 99% of the men here going, dude, what are you thinking?
Right.
What's going on here? And I think that with the whole sexual deviancy thing, it comes to these people are all in our society. There are people, and you see this. I'm a young guy. I've seen this growing up, and from my conclusion that I've built is these people, they start out in middle school, even
right,
12, 13, 14 years old, and they seek this power. They seek this justification.
Right.
And they go, they're in this honor society in high school and SGA and all that. They get to college. They join this society, this club, this SGA, this fraternity, whatever. And they seek this level of power. And in a way, they lose themselves because all they've been taught, all they've thought about is, let me seek this not justification is not the word for it, but this
Right.
reward, this
Right.
this thing that you want. And I think that in a way they lose themselves in the sense that these people have always existed.
Right.
These people that were doing the,
Right.
P. Diddy sex bars or Epstein Island or all that, and for the record, all allegedly.
I want everyone to know that I didn't kill myself either.
Yeah, I'm
Right,
not.
right.
Yeah, we're
Right, exactly right.
we're all good. I'm young and healthy. I didn't have a heart attack. But they always were that way.
Right.
I genuinely do think that these people, because I see it with my own two eyes.
This is why beware any Marxist that tells you that in a campus or anywhere, beware any Marxist who tells you that their analysis is that everyone is motivated by power, because that's not their analysis. That's their confession.
Yes. Well, and
that's what they are motivated by.
Maybe not everyone, but there is a fraction of the population, maybe larger, maybe smaller, that is motivated by that sense of climbing the social ladder. You know, from an anthropological standpoint, it's a very human thing to want to do. The thing is do you sit back and when you get to be a certain age, I was guilty of this, growing up, obviously. Everybody is. But when you get to a certain age, do you ever look around and say, I don't care. I'm going to do what's right, or I'm going to do what's best for me.
Right.
And, I don't care about these other people. But we live in a society today where that's rewarded. You have these people that, are doing these things.
Right.
They've always been that way. I could almost guarantee you that the people at Troy University that are running for SGA or all that would turn a blind eye to this stuff if that meant them getting ahead in this rat race, as some call it.
That's why it's very dangerous because, when in the book of Romans, the Apostle Paul says, he has this idea, be subject to governing authorities because they are God's instrument for the rewarding of good and punishing of evil. Mm-hmm. That's originally why many American colonists in the late 18th century, ethically struggled with the revolution.
Yes.
Because which governing authority should I be subject to? The existing one or the emerging one? And then, for some, the argument became, if the governments are instituted by God for the rewarding of good and punishing of evil, and we're observing a government that is rewarding evil and punishing good, well, then their view is it's not instituted by God. And so that's where it's like you get the idea of if you're in a government system, if you're looking at a government system that is rewarding evil and punishing good, it's losing its legitimacy.
Well, and that goes into the colonists, the early American Revolution. If we look at what the government is doing, if we look at what they're doing for us, are they rewarding good and punishing evil? Some would say yes, some would say no. I lean more on the no side. Paul talks about be subject to your governing authorities.
Right.
Until they ask you to sin.
Right.
Now, the argument could be made, well, is our government making us sin? And the argument could be made, no, they're not. They're not coming to tell you can't worship, you can't do this. But then you could say, where are my tax dollars?
They're not. You were around for 2020.
That's actually something my mother brought up on the way down here. They came to us and said because of this. Now, I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to sit here and it's a great way to get canceled saying COVID was a hoax. But do they have the right to come and tell us you can't worship, you can't pray?
I was COVID left me very discouraged because a lot of the manner in which, I was late to the game in terms of conspiracy theories. Mm-hmm. I still don't consider myself a real conspiracy theorist.
You are.
But this is the way I put it. This is paraphrasing a meme I saw. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not rooting for the conspiracy theorists, but I can look at the scoreboard and see that the conspiracy theorists are ahead of the normies by about 2 touchdowns.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I was late to the game. I really had a very high view of the American government. I still have a high view of the American ideal, the American experiment.
As do I.
But I had a high view of the American government. And yet when 2020 happened, what occurred was something I believed absolutely could never occur in this country in terms of completely shutting down civil liberties
and
like
the
this.
Compliance.
That was the next thing that I absolutely struggled with. How quickly neighbors turned on neighbors.
Absolutely.
And again, I'm reading this book, Nazi Conscience, and I realize, these people walk among us. The contact tracing and every way in which people wanted to kind of keep 6 feet apart. You know where that 6 feet thing comes from. That comes from the Talmud of a full man's wingspan to stay away from lepers. Mm-hmm. There is nothing scientific about that at all.
Or when they shut down the Walmart at 10 o'clock, like COVID comes out after dark.
Oh gosh. Well, and again, from an anthropological standpoint, you're looking at history of religions. You see that the person who's wearing a mask 100 yards away from everyone else outside, that person has not read a peer-reviewed article recently on particulates and airborne viruses. That person is trying to ward off evil spirits. Well, and that is a talisman. That is a amulet they're wearing around their neck to try to ward it off if they fearful unknown.
Do you remember when the mask, there was talk of it going from the mask to mask and goggles?
Oh, gosh.
There was talk of that. I don't know if you remember that. But the mask, the human face is something that, and that's why I think FaceTime has gotten so popular, Skype or,
right.
You can see emotions on the face. But what did COVID do? It dehumanized us.
Children in South Florida needed speech therapy for years after because they had, at the time when they were learning language, children learn language by hearing sounds and watching what the adult mouths do. And they were behind in their speech development because they couldn't witness people doing that.
Well, and I don't think COVID, for the record, COVID was real. It was a real disease. Okay, but since I'm being recorded, COVID was a real disease. COVID was a real thing. Well, I'll give you that. But let's say it was. But if you look, the government will never waste a chance to capitalize on tragedy. Yeah. We look at 9/11. Yeah. Whether you think it was actually Islamic terrorists or if you think George Bush had something to do with it, I don't care. Either way, the Patriot Act, the NSA, all that. Right. All came out of that. And I think COVID was a way for them to kind of, these ruling elites, these people that I'm talking about, will go to these Epstein parties, will, participate in whatever these societies or whatever it is to get ahead. That kind of person, they exist in our government.
Exactly.
That's their end goal, is getting into government or getting into a high level of a company. These kind of people looked at COVID as a chance to see, how can we get away with this?
That was their test case.
And I don't think that there's some big cabal conspiracy of, one world government, all that. No, that's woo-woo. But at the same time, too, now I'm sure that from COVID, there is a list. I'm probably on it. You're probably on it, too, of people that were non-compliant. And maybe not even people. But hey, this guy goes to church. This guy's into this. He's into whatever.
Right.
This kind of person is the one we need to watch out for.
So, my daughter is just absolutely fantastic. But when because we used to talk movies a lot when she was younger, and we still talk about it even now. But people used to ask her a lot when she was younger. This Christian movie came out. God's Not Dead. Have you seen God's Not Dead?
Yes, sir.
And people would say, have you seen God's Not Dead? And she's got this wonderful snarky humor because she would say, have you seen God's Not Dead? She's like, I think so. But is that the one where the underdog has to maintain their conviction in the face of institutional pressure? Yes, exactly, honey. I think I saw that, but the one I saw was called Captain America Winter Soldier. Like, oh, sweetie, you can't. People are going to take that wrong. But no, she's right, though, because it basically, one told the same story rather much more effectively. I actually enjoyed the Marvel movies all the way up through Endgame.
Oh, absolutely.
But Winter Soldier had this idea that Zola's algorithm, if you remember that.
I do not.
If you go back and watch it, there's actually some profound moments early on in the MCU. But they had what they called Zola's algorithm that basically checks. It's an algorithm that is able to check all social media, all posts, all mail, all public comments. Was that?
It's a Palantir.
Palantir, right? And Zola's algorithm, what it does is it had been fed into a computer, and then within the mythology or context of the film, you had these flying aircraft carriers then that had guns that would then pinpoint that person throughout the world and basically take out all those people that would be would likely be non-compliant in the face of a totalitarian takeover. And I remember thinking at the time, I'm totally targeted by Zola's algorithm. I absolutely know that that's the case for a couple of reasons. One, I'm already guilty in this sense. I was attending a church. I was a deacon serving at a church in Orlando, Florida.
Okay.
Never shut down for COVID. Now, there were certain precautions, and I'm not going to mention his name because he may not want me to, but I was training under a priest at the time. I didn't know I was going to become a priest, but I was serving under a priest at the time who I can't sing his praises enough in terms of shepherding a congregation through a time of intense fear. Everybody's afraid of their shadow. No one's exactly sure what's what to believe, next. Or whatever. You've got people that are extremely believing everything they see on the news because they're concerned that the world's about to end. We're now in Dustin Hoffman's hot zone, and then the other side, the people going, this is all conspiracy theory. It's amazing how much everyone's got COVID, but no one's got a cold. And no one's got the flu anymore. This is all amazing stuff, right? Oh, that motorcyclist who's been pancaked on I-4, he died of COVID. And so it's like you've got both sides of it. And so you've got the extremely compliant with government orders, and you've got the extremely ornery people that doubt everything, who happen to be wearing black clothes with a white collar. But the point is, he had to deal on one end of the spectrum, deal with people who are extremely afraid of everything, and on the other end of the spectrum, he had to deal with me. And that guy had to handle the whole congregation of the entire spectrum of people. And I'm like, I just watching, going, I don't think I could have done that. Now here I am in this situation, going, geez, the day is young, but. He had to navigate all that, how to keep a congregation together, taking precautions, kind of being, doing what he did to do to treat people safe. But he says the church does not close. It does not happen. For 2,000 years, church hasn't closed its doors through Roman persecutions, through wars,
through the plague,
through every sort of plague. No, we're not doing it. And I'm telling you right now, well, that guy and anyone who served there, and particularly me, we're in Zola's algorithm, because there's that sense in which you do have this precedent from the book of Acts where the apostles are told to stop preaching the gospel, and they just flat out say, we must obey God rather than man.
Well, and the thing is I think that's something that people need to realize and come to terms with.
Mm-hmm.
In my academic environment, in academia, it has dawned on me that these people that are the true believer types, anything that comes on Fox News or CNN, they automatically believe. These people that were masked up during COVID, and then when the next trendy thing was I'm throwing on a Kamala hat or a MAGA hat. They're not. My generation calls them non-playable characters. Because you mentioned video games last time.
No. We talk about that all the time. NPCs. They're everywhere.
These NPC types. Something that I've had to come to grips with is, Father, they hate us and our way of life. They hate the fact that we worship God. They hate God himself. They hate the fact that, I like guns. I like to be self-sufficient. They hate that. They hate you at your very core for it. And it's something that, I can't grasp. I can't fathom why. I'm not bothering you. Leave me alone. But I think that their problem is they see people like you and myself as a threat to their way of life. We see them as a threat to our way of life. They see us as a threat to their way of life. And when COVID happened, that it would explain a lot of the compliance. For a lot of our audience here, and I don't know about yourself, if you remember back to, I don't know how it was when y'all were in school, but I graduated in 2022.
Mm-hmm.
During COVID, during the whole Black Lives Matter movement, during all this, I remember the quote-unquote popular kids were all buying into and feeding into whatever narrative it was. The trend chasers, the trendsetters. Right. And it goes back to, these are the same people that are going into our government, into... And I think it's not a government issue. I don't think it's a legal issue. Right. It's a societal at its core issue.
Right.
What is a morality issue would be the best word for it.
Well, sometime I don't know how long we can go here, but sometime we should have a conversation about in the absence of religion in a post-religious culture. I contend that the religious instinct is inevitable. It's not escapable, right? But just like an author that I actually enjoyed listening to sometime named Doug Wilson, someone asked him on CNN recently, they said, are you promoting a theocracy? He's a pastor. And he says, are you promoting a theocracy here in the U.S.? He says, America's always been a theocracy. We've just had different gods over time. And so it did have its Christian God as its chief God that it would follow, with varying degrees of closeness of following the God of the Bible. But now it's been replaced with another God. But the point is that the religious instinct means that people will try to follow a new religion. And I contend that religion, that what I call statism.
Absolutely.
Religious statism offers a religion to the irreligious, and it has its own competing set of 10 commandments that correspond to, but are in many ways opposite of the 10 commandments we have from the Bible. It's an entirely other conversation we can have sometime, but nevertheless, people, what you're talking about, who get upset by the independent thinker, the one who's not going to comply, that person has taken their statism to the level of religious zeal, and you're a heretic. And you are
in the same
deviating
way that I may call
from
them a heretic for not believing what we believe.
Right.
And, statism, I'm glad it's the term that I had in my mind. But from an anarchist perspective, that is something that statism is a very thrown around term.
Right.
In a lot of anarchist circles, they will talk about statism.
Right.
And these isms, fascism, communism, anarchism, statism.
Right.
It's all a belief system that people will cling to. I think, and maybe you could speak from a more anthropological standpoint, people by nature are tribal.
Right.
So they have this, oh, you're wearing a mask, you're wearing XYZ, you're dressed like a absolute fool. Let me be like that.
Right.
And the people want a sense of belonging. Something I actually talked about with my therapist yesterday. She asked me how I was like in church down here. And we got talking. She said, you found a place that you feel like you belong.
Yeah. And
she said, that's great for you. That's what people want. That's all they want.
Right.
So when they get in this cult mentality of, okay, if I do X, Y, Z, then I'll be accepted.
Right.
And I think that's where a lot of these, back to these trendsetter types that end up going into government or whatever, they want to belong to something.
Yeah. Well, if you think of statism as a religious instinct, as a scratching of the religious itch, people will get into specific government forms, like for example, communism, fascism. These are subdividing. These are just mechanisms to express the statist religious instinct.
Absolutely.
And because that's how a person becomes totally devoted. You have totalitarianism, total devotion. The total society, total devotion. And in that sense, God of the Bible is totalitarian because there's no part of your life that he's going to leave undone. Mm-hmm. And so he's not like the God of the Bible is not one of, well, however you do whatever you do in public life or with others is whatever, but I mean, I'll regulate that, but you can have your own private life. No, he's into our private life too. So he's totalitarian in that regard, in a positive sense. But these other forms of government, like fascism, fascism, communism, Nazi Germany, Soviet Russia, these are just ways in which the human religious instinct finds a means of expressing itself religiously when it's the normative means of the God of the Bible, the normative means of expressing that to the divine is taken away. So winds up becoming, I contend that has its antecedents in the Tower of Babel. The Tower of Babel is a story about a people that want to collectively make their name great. They want to so make themselves great collectively that they're going to build a tower that reaches to the heavens. Now, it doesn't have, we all picture this as a tall tower reaching to the heavens. The heavens are represented in, like, say, a ziggurat in ancient Sumer, yes, where there's multiple stages, and the bottom stage is going to be same, like, it would have like 4 levels, right? The bottom level would be seen as like the underworld. The next stage would be like the terrestrial world. The
kind
third,
of where Dante's Paradiso.
Exactly right.
From,
and the top level would be seen as like that's where the heavens are. That's where we meet God at the heavens. Typically, where the priest goes up, meets an oracle, comes back down. This idea of the mythological mountain that you go up to the top to meet God and come back down again. Moses on Mount Sinai. Well, the idea is the Tower of Babel is simply a way in which we're going to build our own tower. We're going to storm the gates of heaven ourselves. And so it's a deification of the collective will, the divine we. We are going to do this thing. We are going to go to heaven whether we're invited or not. And we're going to secure for ourselves all the benefits of heaven, whether or not God is compliant or not. And this in many ways represents kind of like the utopian philosophers of the 19th century, Karl Marx and others, that would imagine there being a utopian society that man could achieve just on our own effort. But I think the Tower of Babel story, absolutely, if you take that Tower of Babel story and then you add that layer upon the earlier primal story of the first murder, because Cain and Abel, that murder happens because of resentment over differential blessing. Which is the root of Marxism in many ways. And a lot of our class struggle, the class warfare, the class rhetoric that you see now between oppressor and oppressed, that has been, permeates our society now. And then even letting that upon the layer of the major sin from the garden, which is the knowledge of good and evil. The knowledge of good and evil, when you consider it to be proprietary knowledge, who gets to say what's good and evil? If it's divine proprietary knowledge, and I'm just going to grab that for myself, I'm going to take for myself the divine prerogative of declaring what's good and evil, which is the fruit idea.
Well, and
so those taken together is where we're at.
I'm not a Marxist in the slightest. I'm not, but I've read Marx. He has some good ideas, just as anything.
Broken watches right twice a day.
That's what I was going to say. He's only got a couple of them.
Right.
But I think what needs to happen is we need to have an honest dialogue between all of these systems, between all these philosophers, and say, okay, well, he was wrong about 99% of what he said, but what was the one good thing he said? And this idea that I think what I'm getting from our conversation here to the audience. It's a lot more.
Don't worry about them. We're just
what I'm saying is to you, to the audience, to whoever. Life is a lot more simple when you look at it like this. Worship God, not man. And if you will get in church, a good church, not one of these crazy ones, but if you will get in a good church and take away all the political or status affiliations you have and let God guide that yourself,
right, you're
going to be much happier, much more secure, and much more prosperous as an individual and as a group of people. I think where the Enlightenment and these philosophers, I think where they went wrong is we had a good system.
Right.
We had a Bible. We had a belief system.
Yeah.
It didn't need to change.
No.
Now, were there probably some things that we could have looked at and done more theological talkings on and thought more into? Absolutely. Should we be burning witches? No. But at the same time, too, what was the Bible's worked for us for the past 2,000 years?
Right.
And is it a coincidence that when societies start getting away from that, that's when they crumble?
Well, and again, I don't want to get too much into a whole other topic, but I mean, for me, it's always interesting the amount of people that would claim that they would historically in our society would claim that they are influenced by the Bible or they have a Christian background, but it doesn't influence their interaction with. It hasn't had much of an influence on their interaction with government and what they require of their government either. And so I think that when people actually are diving into the scriptures and they're actually looking into the Bible, and they're going to want robust worship that connects them to each other and to the ancient church as well. And it's going to have a profound effect on how much of a better world around them they want to make.
Well, it goes in the kingdom theology.
Exactly.
What the church is a an outpost of the kingdom of heaven
right.
on earth, Christians, soldiers, priests, or generals,
right.
that whole idea. I do think that I'm trying to find a way to word this articulately, however you say that word.
Right.
I think that as Christians, we have a duty to, we were talking about this Sunday, the first thing in my list of priorities is the church. Then, I can get into my community, my country, whatever. Right. But if you start putting the church first, things tend to work out a little bit better. The idea that, we can fix everything, the utopian philosophies you were talking about, no such thing as utopia. It's called heaven.
Well, what your prioritization of the church, the community of faith, is the only positive tribalism.
Absolutely.
Because that's how God gathers people together, is by faith. So,
well, it's a common belief system.
Right, exactly. And then by having that, then everything else can fall into place because you start from that common worldview, the common view of reality, and everything else is smaller details than that.
Yes, sir.
So, we've been going for an hour and 10 minutes, so really appreciate you talking to me all this time.
Yes, sir.
We could go on for a lot longer, I think,
because trust me, we could.
Yeah, because I still would like to be able to chat even more in the future about hot and button topics on we only barely scratched the surface, but
what I'm hearing is I'm your excuse to get the hot button topics so you can blame all the controversy on me.
Well, in truth, are you familiar with Charlie Kirk?
Oh, am I?
Okay. Because he's someone who talks about what are the hot button topics on college campuses, right? Talking to people, because that is kind of like very much a hotbed of where people are being trained to go become part of our workforce, become our movers and shakers and our influences.
Two things about college campus, and to kind of close on. If me being a college student on the podcast, if you get any kind of good from that, two things that you need to realize about college campus. It's not necessarily workforce training. And this is just in my specific field. People believe that they're being trained to be regulators of morality. As they study history or these more personal, human-focused topics, it gives a lot of people a sense of superiority that they have studied all the wrong, that they can say what's moral and what's not. And two, especially in these history fields, propaganda production.
Yeah.
What can we say to make our worldview or whatever our group look righteous?
Right.
And that's something. And Charlie Kirk, not to get too deep down that rabbit hole, a lot of times he doesn't know what he's talking about. I think he goes and debates with college students. I think from our conversation here, we're not the most. I've been on this earth 21 years. I don't know too much, but having these conversations and having this discussion, because Father, you operate in what I like to call the real world. You deal with real life problems with real life people, and having somebody that comes into this from these academic settings, from a lot of abstract thoughts, I think is really beneficial to both of us to see what's going on both sides of the coin, I guess.
Well, I do think that you need to the church has to maintain a robust dialogue with specifically that demographic of people that are in college. That's that age where everyone's wanting to test everything. They're wanting to see put these two chemicals together. How does it explode in the lab? Does this idea that I've been taught, does it measure up against reality? How is it compared to other ideas I've known? That's supposed to be that curiosity and that zeal that's kind of in that college age era. Now, for a lot of college, they become indoctrination institutions.
Absolutely.
And they've broken trust with that responsibility of the learner. They're supposed to have a covenant with the learner that you help them grow and develop and make it so that they can handle all that they'll encounter, not just in their profession, but outside of life. And many have broken trust with in that covenant with the learner.
And I will say that is what I just said was a generalized statement.
Right.
Shout out to Dr. Nowinska. I'm probably going to send her the podcast, let her listen to it. That woman is great professor that's really great about curiosity and encouraging dialogue.
Right.
There are a couple like her, but then there's a lot that are not that way. And if you question certain things, if you question certain topics, you're an outcast. And that's something that, you know, I have a lot of respect for these certain professors, such as Dr. Nowinska, that you can question anything. Now, you may be wrong,
right?
But as long as you question, you're fine. That's something that I think is great, you know, to have dialogue. There's no harm in talking.
I don't think so, and I think we need more of it.
Absolutely. So, we'll have to get another podcast.
Thank you so much for talking to me. This was a lot of fun.
I've enjoyed this.
Like I said, we could go a lot longer, but this is an example of the type of conversations that we want to facilitate. I love the fact that these kind of conversations happen on our porch after church, but especially we want to have this more for. There needs to be more of this, I think, in church. Obviously, it's where Mass is celebrated. It's obviously where our liturgy, the beauty of our liturgy and our history and our symbols and all of our theology comes together. But this is also a major key aspect of a people that are living together in community, having the shared faith, and that's how you orient reality.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me, Father.
No problem.